Hey everyone, what's up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Kuf Nun Daled of Masechta Shabbos, Daf 154. Okay, so the first Amud today we are going to continue our discussion about Mechamer, that's somebody who sort of guides and escorts his animal carrying stuff on Shabbos. I guess it's donkey. What exactly are the implications of that? And then on Amud Beis we're going to spend a bunch of time discussing unloading an animal, how to do that on Shabbos. If you got stuff on the animal, you want to unload it. And then using the side of an animal, which kind of gets into also using the side of a tree, that basically, what if you're not using the animal itself, but just kind of like the side of the animal, and we'll see exactly what that means. Okay, let us start on Daf Kuf Nun Daled Amud Aleph Mamish, all the way at the top of the page. First word on the page. Rav Zvid Masni Hachi. So remember, friends, yesterday Rami Bar Chama had said that somebody who escorts his animal on Shabbos, so if you have an animal that, like a donkey, that has a bunch of stuff on it, and you just kind of whistle to indicate to the donkey, hey, donkey guy, come. And then he starts moving with your stuff on it. So Rami Bar Chama said that if you do that b'shogeg, you are chayav a korban chatas. If you do it b'mezid, you are chayav skila. Rava asked two questions. Question number one is, how can you say that you're chayav a korban chatas? In order to be chayav a korban chatas, you have to do something. Here he's just whistling. And number two, how could you say that you're chayav skila? After all, the Mishnah in Sanhedrin, which talks about in which cases you would be chayav skila for being mechal Shabbos, it says you're only mechal Shabbos in a situation where you would be chayav a korban chatas b'shogeg and kares b'mezid, which implies that there's got to be some melacha that you're not chayav a korban chatas and not chayav kares, and therefore you would not be chayav skila. But the Gemara responded to Rava and said, no, that's not, we have other cases for that. It's not mechamer, rather it's tchumen according to Rabbi Kiva, it's havara according to Rabbi Yossi. However, Rava's first question does still stand, that how can Rami Bar Chama say that you'd be chayav a korban chatas for mechamer by accident, b'shogeg, if there's no maaseh. So to that, Rav Zvid Masnei Hachi, Rav Zvid therefore teaches Rami Bar Chama in the following way. Amar Rami Bar Chama, ha-mechamer acher behema b'Shabbos. So if somebody is mechamer on Shabbos, b'shogeg eino chayav chatas. Oh, so just like Rava said, so if he does it b'shogeg, so then he's not going to be chayav a korban chatas because there's no maaseh. B'mezid chayav skila. However, b'mezid he will be chayav skila. Rava tried to argue that he wouldn't be chayav skila. That got deflected. So b'mezid you're still going to be chayav skila. Fine. Masav Rava, but Rava asks a kasha now on Rav Zvid. Ha-mechal Shabbos, somebody who is mechal Shabbos, b'davar shechayav al shigagas uchatas, chayav al zedon kares skila. So we have a brisa that says that somebody who is mechal Shabbos and he does something that you'd be chayav a korban chatas if you do it b'shogeg, well then you're going to be chayav skila if you do it b'mezid. And there are witnesses and they warned you, etc. Right? As long as they did everything that they needed to do for you to get stoned, so then you will get stoned. So we have a brisa that says that anything that you can be chayav a korban chatas for if you do it b'shogeg, you're going to be chayav skila for if you do it b'mezid. That's the brisa. Now Rava wants to make the following implication, which is that the inverse should now be true. Ha-ein chayav an al shigagas uchatas, ein chayav an al zedon skila. Rava now wants to say that the inverse should now be true. That just like anything that you're chayav a korban chatas b'shogeg, you're chayav skila b'mezid. Well then Rava wants to argue that if you're not chayav a korban chatas b'shogeg, then you're not chayav skila b'mezid. And therefore, since you're not chayav korban chatas b'shogeg when it comes to mechamer, you also would not be chayav skila if you do mechamer b'mezid. That's his kasha against Rami Bar Chama. Well, that against Rav Zvid's explanation of Rami Bar Chama. But the Gemara responds to Rava, Mikatani ha'en chayav and chule. But Rava, does the Brisa explicitly say what you're arguing? All the Brisa says is that anything that you're chayav a korban chatas for b'shogeg, you're chayav skila for b'mezid. The Brisa absolutely does not say that if you're not chayav a korban chatas, then you're not chayav skila. Hachi kamar, this is what the Brisa is saying. Anything that you're chayav a korban chatas, if you do it b'shogeg, well then if you do it b'mezid, you're chayav skila. V'yesh davar she'ein chayavan al shegigaso chatas v'chayavan al zdono skila. However, the inverse is not true, because there is something that you will not be chayav a korban chatas for if you do it b'shogeg, yet you will be chayav skila if you do it b'mezid. Umayniu mechamer, and what is that? It's mechamer. And therefore, what Rav Zvid is saying, or Rav Zvid's version of Rami Bar Chama, is absolutely fine. Which is that if you do mechamer b'shogeg, you're going to be potter from a korban chatas. Yet, if you do it b'mezid, you're going to be chayav skila. Rava Achva de Rav Mari Bar Rachel. So Rava, who is the brother of Rav Mari Bar Rachel, we've seen Rav Mari Bar Rachel a few times. If I'm not mistaken, Rachel was the daughter of Shmuel the Amora, and she was taken captive. And while she was taken captive, she became pregnant with a child, and that is Rav Mari Bar Rachel. Now Rava was the brother of Rav Mari Bar Rachel, and now the Gemara says something parenthetical. The Gaon Sabach even says that you can skip it completely. Whatever, we can read it. V'amila avua de Rav Mari Bar Rachel. Some say it was the father. It was Rava who was the father of Rav Mari Bar Rachel. However, the Lishna Basa Kasha. However, that wouldn't make sense to say that somebody named Rava was the father of Rav Mari Bar Rachel. Da Rav Achshre Rav Mari Bar Rachel. Manya before said Debavel, because after all, Rav needed to, pull some strings, basically it was a question that since Rav Mari Bar Rachel was born to, had a non-Jewish father, so there was a question, can he be part of sort of like the leadership in Bavel? And Rav says, yes, he can, but it was a whole shaila. But if his father's name was Rava, then what's there even to talk about? Meaning his father was obviously Jewish. So, Dilma Trey Mari Bar Rachel Hava, maybe there were two Mari Bar Rachels. One of them's father was Rava, one of them's father was not. Whatever it might be, but Nagos Abach says you can even just skip that whole thing. So after having read it, let's just skip it. So if we go back to the beginning of this statement, Rava Achba de Rav Mari Bar Rachel. So Rava, who is the brother of Rav Mari Bar Rachel. So now skip a few lines. Havamasne la Hashmaita Mishmed Rabbi Yochanan Liftor. So he taught this whole thing about Mechamer in the name of Rabbi Yochanan to say that you're completely potter. Let's see. Rabbi Yochanan says, Rabbi Yochanan, Mechamer Acher Behemto B'Shabbos. Somebody who is Mechamer on Shabbos, potter miklum, he's 100% potter. B'Shogeg lo Mechayev Chatas. If he is Mechamer B'Shogeg, he's not chayav a korban chatas. Tuksha kol Torah kula la'avodah zara, because the entire Torah is compared to avodah zara when it comes to a korban chatas. Just like by avodah zara, you have to have an action. Also, by every korban chatas, you have to have an action. And here, there's no action; it's just whistling to signal to his animal to move. And b'mezid nami lo mechayev. And also, if he is mechamer b'mezid, he's not going to be chayav skila. How come? Ditnan, as we learn in the Mishnah in Sanhedrin. Now, I'm going to read this Gemara as the Mishnah is written in Sanhedrin. There are different girsas over here. I'm just going to stay consistent to how we read it yesterday, which is to read it based on the Mishnah in Sanhedrin. And the Mishnah in Sanhedrin says, "Machala es Shabbos b'davar shechayaven al shigigaso chatas v'al zdono karis." That somebody who's going to be chayav. The Mishnah in Sanhedrin is talking about skila, and it's saying that when it comes to Chilul Shabbos, there are those that are going to be chayav skila, and that is if they do something that you're chayav for b'shogeg, you'd be chayav a korban chatas, and b'mezid you'd be chayav karis. Ha'ein chayav asher yigaso chatas, ein chayav azadono skila. Right? Meaning, and therefore, the implication is that over here, when it comes to mechamer, so we've proven that you're not going to be chayav a korban chatas for mechamer if you do it b'shogeg, and therefore you're not going to be chayav skila if you do it b'mezid, because the Mishnah in Sanhedrin says that when are you going to be chayav korban? When are you going to be chayav skila for chilul Shabbos? That's only something that you are both chayav a korban chatas b'shogeg as well as chayav kares if you do it b'mezid. However, here, when it comes to mechamer, you're not chayav a korban chatas b'shogeg, so you're not going to be chayav skila because you don't have the right criteria. Mechamer doesn't have the right criteria. Bilav nami lo mechayev, and then the Gemara says, and not only when it comes to mechamer are you not going to be chayav a korban chatas, you're also not even chayav lashes, right? In general, when it comes to people who do a lav, people who do violate a mitzvah's lo saseh, such as in this case lo saisa kol malacha. So we're saying that in this case he's not chayav a korban chatas, but right, or b'mezid he's not chayav skila. But let's say that at least. Right, so we're saying, okay, yeah, I think it's probably more focusing on the fact that we're saying that B'mezid is not chayiv skila. And not only is he not chayiv skila, we don't say, okay, well, we're not going to stone him, but maybe let's give him lashes. No, we're not going to give him lashes either for violating the lav of lo saisa kol malacha. Davle lav shenitan lasaris misas bezdin. Because this lav of lo saisa kol malacha is what's called a lav shenitan lasaris misas bezdin. A lav that has associated with it capital punishment. Right? Because l'saisa kol malacha, don't do any malacha on Shabbos, is a reference to any malacha on Shabbos. And in general, if you do malacha on Shabbos, you're chayiv skila. So therefore, when it comes to mechamer, even though you're not going to be chayiv skila when it comes to mechamer, you're also not going to be chayiv lashes either, because it's something that, l'saisa kol malacha is something that is, skila is associated with it. And therefore, since skila is associated with it, even in a situation where skila doesn't apply, you're not going to get lashes either. Whenever you have a lav shenitan lasaris misas bezdin, whenever you have a lav that associated with it is capital punishment, well then you're not going to have lashes. And even according to Manda Amr, which says that when you have a lav shenitan lasaris misas bezdin, you can get lashes. Still, over here by mechamer, you wouldn't get lashes. Because lichtov rachmana lo saisa kol malacha uvehem techa ato lamali hu niu d'mechayev behem to lo mechayev. So the Gemara says that even according to Manda Amru, who says that lav shenitan lasaris misas bezdin, you can get lashes for it. So therefore, I might think to say, well, okay, so since by mechamer you're not chayev skila, then you should at least be chayev for lashes. No, over here, don't say that, because the pasuk says lo ta'aseh kol malacha, don't do any malacha, and then it says ata uvehem techa. But what's the point of ata? Just say, don't do malacha, and also your animal. What's ata? What's specific about you? So ata, lama, li, how come it says ata? Hu niu de mechayev, v'hem to lo mechayev. That he's only mechayev, malkos or skila, if he himself does something. But for his animal doing it, he's not going to be chayev. Okay, and therefore, it says of Yochanan that if a person is mechamer on Shabbos, whether it's b'shogeg, whether it's b'mezid, he is not going to be chayev anything. Not a korban chatas, not skila, not malchus, nothing. Okay, says the Mishnah, right? So we said that if there's no non-Jew available, if there's no non-Jew with him on Erev Shabbos to give his wallet to, so then he can take his wallet and put it on his animal, on his donkey, and then when he gets to the first chatzer in the city, so then he can unload it from the animal, from the donkey. So Amar Rav Huna, so says Rav Huna, if his animal was laden with glass, maybe kar muchsasos umaniach tachteh. So what you could do is you can take pillows and cushions, put it under these sacks, umate achavalim vasakin noflim, and then you can undo the ropes that are holding the sacks to the donkey, and then the sacks will fall on the cushions, and nothing will break. Why do you need to do this though? The Mishnah says that as long as things are mukhan, as long as they're not muksa, as long as they're mukhan, you're allowed to just push it, take it off of the animal. So why bichlal would I need to undo the ropes and let them fall onto pillows? Just take them off yourself. Ki ka'amar Rav Huna bekarne de umana. So Rav Huna, wow, it sounds like there's a dog that's getting excited. So Rav Huna, when he's suggesting that you untie the ropes and let the sack fall, it's because the glass that we're talking about is muktzah glass. It's talking about these, what do we call them? Pipettes of bloodletters. Used pipettes of bloodletters that like had blood in them, and like they're kind of gross and muktzah. So therefore you can't just take them off of the animal because they're muktzah. So you have to just untie the ropes and let them fall. And what Rav Huna is saying is that you would be allowed to take cushions to pad the fall so that they don't break. But what about the fact that when they fall onto the cushion, well, now the cushion is going to be supporting these muktzah glass items, and now you can't use the cushion for the rest of Shabbos, and you're going to be mevatel kli mei chana, as we've seen a few times, right? That you're going to have this cushion, which was usable up until now, that now, once the glasses fall on it, you can no longer use for the rest of Shabbos, and we don't do that on Shabbos. So b'shlife zutre. So my answer is that it's talking about where these packages of these pipettes were very small, and therefore because they're very small, what you can do is you can stack a whole bunch of cushions one on top of the other, kind of untie these little sacks, they'll fall on the cushion, then you can kind of like slide out each cushion one at a time, it'll fall on the other cushion, nothing will break, but at the same time you can also keep on sliding out the cushions so that you can also use them again later, and that seems to be acceptable. Beseder. So Rav Huna seems to be arguing that if you have muktzah items on a donkey, and therefore you can't take them off, you can just untie the ropes and let them fall on the ground. If you want to make sure that they don't shatter, you can bring over some pillows and put it under the item, as long as you will not be mevatel the kli mei heichanu. Meisvei. So now the Gemara asks the kasha on Rav Huna. Okay, what's the kasha? Haizibemto tuuna tevel v'ashashios. So if his animal is laden with tevel is of course untied produce, and therefore it's muktzah, because you can't eat it on Shabbos, and you also can't separate trumas and ma'asos on Shabbos, so it's muktzah. V'ashashios, and there's also like glass, like beams, glass like what does he say? Glass, thick pieces of glass, okay, on your animal. So what do you do? Mater sachavalim v'asakin noflin v'avbisha mishtabin. So what do you do? So the tevel obviously is muktzah. The glass we'll have to figure out. But we say, what do? You take the ropes, you untie them, and you let them fall onto the floor. Okay? So, and even though the glass is going to break. So the question is, according to Rav Huna, didn't you say that you'd be allowed to bring over pillows? Why don't you just bring over pillows over here to make sure that the glass doesn't break? Sounds like you're not allowed to bring pillows, because if you would be allowed to bring pillows, then why not bring them? So the Gemara answers Hasan b'chulsa. So the Gemara answers no. The glass that we're talking about is muktzah glass, right? And this, well, not only is it muktzah glass, but it's these big glass kind of like panes that they would use for windows, okay? And therefore they're not a kli, and therefore they're muktzah, and therefore you wouldn't be allowed to remove them from the donkey. That's why you have to just, let open the ropes and let them fall. Now, the concern also is that because they're these big panes of glass that you can use for windows, if you let them fall onto a pillow, well, then it's just going to get stuck on the pillow, and you're going to be mevatel kli mei heichanu. And therefore, that is why you're, in this case, with these big panes of glass and the tevel, we're saying unravel the rope, let them fall on the on the ground, and you can't bring over a pillow because that will be mevatel kli mei heichanu. And if it means that the glass is going to break, then that is acceptable. Now, an interesting thing about these glass panes is that these big glass panes, you're going to have to cut them up into smaller pieces later anyhow, right? Meaning for your window, you right now have a very big glass pane, and you are going to need to cut it up into smaller pieces for your window later, right? And therefore, when this glass falls on the ground, okay, it's not really such a big deal because you are going to have to break the glass anyways, and we're going to see in a minute how this is going to come into play. So the Gemara says now, dekanami, you can also infer from here that we're talking about glass that is muktzah, such as these glass panes that are not a kli. The Katani, as the Mishnah says, as the Brisa says, Dumya de Tevel. It's talking about glass, and it's using it in the same breath as Tevel. Right? Ma Tevel de lo chazile, hafachanami lo chazile. Just like Tevel is muktzah. So also we're talking about glass that is muktzah, like these big window panes. Umay alfa pisha mishtabrin. And what's the point of the alfa pisha mishtabrin, that even though this glass pane is going to break? So ma'avdetema lehefsid muad nami chashashu kamash malan. I might think that just like the Chachamim, just like in our Mishnah, the Chachamim said you're allowed to ask a non-Jew, let's say, to take your wallet for you, because even though in general they say that you're not allowed to ask a non-Jew to do malacha for you, but in the case of hefsid mammon, right, they said they waived their din derabanan in the context where you might stand to lose a lot of money. So I might think that applies also to hefsid mu'at. Right, that when these glass panes break, even though you're going to have to break them later on to make them into smaller pieces to use for windows, but I might think, but when I just let them drop on the floor, well, there are going to be shards that inevitably are going to be separated, and I'm going to lose those, and it's a little bit of a hefsid. So I might think that they would say that let you bring over pillows and let the glass fall into those pillows so that they don't break. What about the fact that you're being mevatel kli me'echanu? And midirabanan, we say that not to be mevatel a kli me'echanu. But we'll say that, well, in the case, in order to save these shards that are going to get lost when the glass breaks by falling on the floor, so maybe I would be allowed to bring over a pillow, and, saving these little shards would override the concern about being mevatel kli me'echanu. Kamash malan, we're saying no, do not bring over a pillow, because by bringing over a pillow, the glass will basically stay on the pillow for the rest of Shabbos, and we don't say that saving these little shards is going to be enough of a reason to override the din derabanan of being mevatel kli me'echanu, and therefore we say even though the glass shards are going to break and you'll lose a little bit of money, still do not bring over a pillow. However, Rav Huna's principle does still remain intact, which is you would be allowed to bring over a pillow as long as it would not be mevatel the pillow me'echanu, such as when you have those small pipettes from the bloodletters. Okay, fine. Tanya, we learn in a brisa. Reb Shimon ben Yochai Omer, says Reb Shimon ben Yochai, tu'una shlif shel tavua. If his animal had like a sack of grain on it. Okay, so imagine like a big sack full of grain, and you put it on your donkey. And how do you put it on your donkey? You put it horizontally on the donkey. So you have, half of the sack is on the left side of the donkey, half of the sack is, hanging over the right side of the donkey. So maniach rosho tachtel u'misakol etzad acher v'unof me'elav. So what you can do is you can, on Shabbos, go under one side of the sack, stand up, and kind of by doing so knock over the sack to the other side of the donkey and let it fall off that way. Okay. Chamor Rabban Gamliel Haisa Tu'una Dvash. Rabban Gamliel's donkey was laden with honey. I lost my place. Okay. Rabban Gamliel's donkey was laden with honey. V'lo ratza lefork ad Motzai Shabbos, and he didn't want to take the honey off of the donkey until Motzai Shabbos. The Motzai Shabbos Mesa. And then guess what happened? Saturday night, the donkey died. Okay, so Rabban Gamliel's donkey had honey on it, and he didn't want to remove the honey from the donkey, and sure enough, the donkey died because of, just standing there with all this honey on it. But one second, why would Rabban Gamliel do that? After all, our Mishnah says that if you have vessels that are not muksa, so you can take them off of the donkey. And surely honey is muchan. Surely you're allowed to use honey on Shabbos. Kisha hidbish. It's talking about where the honey went rancid. Hidbish l'may chazi. But if we're talking about rancid honey, then why would Rabban Gamliel be transporting it in the first place? It's useless. Lichtisa de gamle. No, it's useful for, these camels. So when camels, based on their saddles and stuff, so they can get these big cuts and like rash and abrasions on their skin from being worked hard. So what you do is you take some like rancid honey and you can cover the wounds, and I guess it's good. So therefore, while it's muktzah on Shabbos, it does have a purpose. V'yatir chavalim v'yiplu sakin. Okay, but still, so then, the Mishnah says, what do you do when you have muktzah stuff on the animal? Well, you just untie the ropes and let them fall into the ground. Well, mitztru zike. well, if he does that, well then the sacks of honey or the containers of honey will split open, and you're going to lose the honey, and therefore you didn't want to do that. Well, why don't you take pillows and cushions and put it under the sacks to break the fall, so that when they fall, they'll fall on the pillows and they won't split open. Well, if you do that, well then some of the honey is going to get on the cushions and it's going to be mevato kli meichanu. But what about the fact that you have tzar ba'alechaim? Tzar ba'alechaim is a midoraisa. By midoraisa, you cannot have animals be in an uncomfortable situation, and therefore that would override the din derabanan of being mevato kli meichanu. Kasav tzar ba'alechaim derabanan. Well, Rabbi Gamliel is of the opinion that tzar ba'alechaim is only midorabanan, and therefore you wouldn't be able to override the din derabanan of being mevato kli meichanu for the din derabanan of tzar ba'alechaim. So the donkey died. Abaye ashkechele l'Rava the kamashafshef le'levrei agab l'Rabba the kamashafshef le'levrei agaba d'chamra. So Abaye found Rabba, and Rabba was playing with his son. How was he playing with his son? Well, he was putting his son on the donkey and using the donkey like a slide. He's putting the son on the donkey and sliding the son off the side of the donkey, and that is how he was playing with his son on Shabbos. So Abaye says to Rabba, he says, wait, Rabba, what's going on here? Aren't you basically using an animal on Shabbos? And apparently we learn in the Gemara in Beitza that you're not allowed to use an animal on Shabbos. The concern is that if you, let's say, ride an animal, well, you might break a branch off of a tree in order to use as like something to like guide the animal with. And then interestingly, the same thing applies, as we're going to see in a few minutes, it becomes relevant, that the same thing would apply to climbing a tree. You're not allowed to climb a tree on Shabbos because we're concerned that you might break off a branch. So we see that you're not allowed to ride an animal, which implies to all use of an animal. You're not allowed to use an animal on Shabbos or on Yom Tiv. So Abaye asks Rabbi, he says, why are you playing with your son on the donkey? You're not allowed to use animals on Shabbos. Rabbi says, yeah, but I'm just sliding my son off of the side of the donkey, and the Rabbanan's prohibition of using an animal doesn't apply to using the sides of the animal. Minatema, and from where will you say this? Titanan, as we learn in the Mishnah, noflin, as our Mishnah says, that when you have these sacks of muksa items on the donkey, so you just untie the ropes, and the sacks just kind of fall down. So now, how were these sacks attached to the donkey in the first place? My lab, bechever givalke davlut stadin v'stadin logazbu rabbanan. Mistamid's talking about where you had like a sack on either side of the donkey, and then the two sacks were kind of tied to each other with like rope. So basically, imagine like a sack on either side of the donkey, and then or almost imagine like a nunchucks kind of thing. So you have like one kind of side and then the other side, and they're like attached by a chain. So imagine you have like two sacks and they're like kind of attached by rope in the middle. So the rope goes over the back of the donkey, and then you have the two sacks hanging down the side, which means that in order to untie the sacks, you're actually going to have to lean onto the side of the donkey in order to untie the sacks. And the Mishnah doesn't seem to have a problem with that. So apparently using the side of an animal on Shabbos seems to be acceptable, and that's why Rabbah was playing with his son and sliding him down the side of the donkey. So the Gemara says, "Lo bechever agi lavke dilo avut staden inami bilachta." So the Gemara says, no, the sacks were secured to the donkey in ways that you'd be able to remove them from the donkey without having to like lean on the side of the donkey. Either, it was hard to understand the exact descriptions. Some kind of a pin, like some kind of like a tied in such a way that there was then some kind of pin tied into it, and you would easily be able to like take out the pin, or some kind of a clip. Whatever it is, the point is that the sacks were attached to the donkey in such a way that you'd be able to remove them without having to lean upon the side of the donkey. So it is not a proof to say that you'd be allowed to use the side of an animal on Shabbos. Now, the Gemara asks a kasha. Eisvei. Abaye now asks a kasha against Rabbah. Remember, Rabbah seems to have no problem with using the side of an animal on Shabbos. Abaye asks a kasha on Rabbah. Abaye wants to argue that you're not allowed to use the size of an animal, and he's going to bring a proof based on using the side of a tree on Yom Tif for your sukkah. right? We said that it's essentially the same concern with an animal as it is with a tree, meaning don't ride an animal because we're concerned that you're going to break a branch off of a tree to be like a stick to lead it. And the same thing applies to climbing a tree. Do not use a tree on Shabbos because you might break off a branch while you're doing it. So therefore, Abaye wants to bring a proof against where we see that you're not allowed to use the side of a tree, and therefore that would prove that you're not allowed to use the side of an animal either. So shtaim bidei adam v'achas be'ilan ksheira ve'en odin la b'yamtiv. So when it comes to a sukkah, the halacha is that a sukkah needs to have 3 walls. A sukkah with 3 walls is a kosher sukkah. So we say that if you have 2 walls that are man-made, so you basically just make 2 walls, and the 3rd wall is a tree, okay, ksheira. So it's a kosher sukkah. However, ve'en odin la b'yamtiv, yet you wouldn't be allowed to go into this sukkah on Yom Tov. So even though it's a kosher sukkah, you would not be able to go into this sukkah on Yom Tov. My love, mistama, what are we talking about? What's the concern? So Abaye wants to argue that what are we talking about when we say that the 3rd wall is a tree? Abaye wants to say, it's talking about you had a tree and you etched into the tree, kind of made like a notch in the tree, and then you took a board of wood and you stuck it into this notch that you made in the tree, and that's your 3rd wall. It's some kind of board that you stuck into a tree. So you have 2 man-made walls, and then you have the 3rd wall, which consists of a tree that you stuck a board into, and then you're putting schach on top of this board. Okay? So therefore, this board is essentially tzidei ilan. It's not the tree itself. It's basically something that's attached to the tree. It's tzidei ilan, the side of the tree. And we're saying that that while it's a kosher sukkah, you're not allowed to use it on Yom Tov. How come? Well, because if you're going to be putting the schach on and resting the schach on the side of this tree, and then if you're going to end up like, let's say, putting stuff on the schach on Yom Tov, let's say a pot or something, you need to rest it on top of the schach, well, then you're going to be using the tree, essentially, because the schach is resting on this side of the tree, so you're going to be using this side of the tree. And we're saying that you're not allowed to use the sukkah on Yom Tov out of concern that you might end up using the side of the tree, getting benefit from the side of the tree. So we see that there are issues with the side of the tree, and therefore the same thing should be that the same issues would apply to the side of an animal. So the Gemara answers, lo. It's not talking about where you're putting a board into the tree and it will be considered the side of the tree. So the Gemara answers, no. The Mishnah in Sukkah is saying that it's talking about so you had 2 man-made walls, and the 3rd wall was basically there were 2 trees, and you took their branches and kind of tied the branches to each other to kind of make something that you can put schach on, right? So there's branches, you tie them together, and now you're going to lay schach on top of those branches that you tied together, and that is your 3rd wall. And therefore, you're mamish putting the schach on the tree itself, not just on some kind of piece of wood that you stuck into a tree. You're mamish putting it on the tree itself, and that is why the Mishnah is saying that you can't go into the sukkah on Yom Tov, because if you then put stuff on the schach, you're going to be benefiting directly from the tree that the schach is resting on. However, it's no implication to say, there's no indication that tzidei ilan would be a problem, because this is, after all, talking about the tree itself. So now Abaye says, but one second, how could it be talking about the tree itself? If that's the case, ema seifa. Let's read on in that Mishnah. Shalosh bidei adam ve'achas be'ilan. If you have 3 walls that are man-made, and then the 4th wall is this tree, ksheira, okay, so it's also kosher. V'odin la b'yom tov. And this time you're actually allowed to go into this sukkah on Yom Tov. Now, v'id chafye le'ilan amai odin la b'yom tov. And Abaye is saying, Rabbah, if you're correct, or whoever's answering for Rabbah, if it's correct to say that we're talking about these trees that you're actually tying the branches together and using the branches themselves, well then, why does it make a difference that there are 3 walls and now these tied together branches are forming the 4th wall? I mean, if the schach is resting on these trees, well, then if you're going to be using the schach, you're going to be benefiting directly from the trees. Why should it make a difference if the trees that are tied together are the 3rd wall or the 4th wall? It's still the same concern. So, if you're going to say that we're talking about these trees, then why does it being the fourth wall make any difference? But then the Gemara says, yeah, but arguing that it's tzidei ilan, that it's a tree that you etched a notch into and then put a board of wood into there, and it's tzidei ilan, you're going to have the same exact question, right? Ve'elamai, stadin asurin, right? But, ve'elamai, stadin asurin, right? But, right, I'm sorry, ve'elamai, stadin asurin, right? So, I'm sorry, ve'elamai, stadin asurin, no, but Abaye, if you want to argue, right, to make the argument that stadin are asurin, right? Because Abaye, was making the argument that the Mishnah is talking about when you took a board and put it into the tree and it was stadin, and we're saying that the Mishnah is saying that it's asur, but sof amai olden la b'yamtiv, right? If that's the case, still you have the same question. Why in the Seifa would you be allowed to go into that sukkah where the fourth wall is this board that you stuck into the tree? After all, Abaye, you're saying that stadei ilan are a problem. Well then, when I go into this tree on Yom Tif that has 3 man-made walls, and the fourth wall is like a piece of wood, a board of wood that you stuck into the tree, well, if I'm going to put stuff on the schach, and the schach is leaning on that stadei ilan, well then I'm going to be benefiting from the stadei ilan, and Abaye, aren't you saying that would be a problem? So, rather, hasam begavaza parsichna, the ilan gufe dofen ba'almahu, the shavya. So, the Gemara says, rather, there's no implication about stadei ilan or not. Rather, this tree that we're talking about is just where you have a tree that's standing there. It's not, right, when you have a tree, that the tree itself is serving as the fourth wall. So you have a tree, and this tree has branches, and those branches are just kind of serving as the fourth wall. It's not talking about where you're taking 2 different trees and tying them together. It's not talking about where you take a board and stick it into the tree. Rather, you have a tree, and this tree has branches that spread out, and now you have 2 man-made walls, and you're using these spread out branches as the third wall, or as the fourth wall. So when you have 2 walls, and the third wall are these branches, well then you're not allowed to go into that tree on Yom Tov, because you're going to have to be putting the schach on these branches, and therefore if you put anything on the schach on Yom Tov, like a pot or something on the schach, then you're going to be benefiting directly from the tree, and that is a problem. However, if you have 3 man-made walls, and the fourth one are these branches, well then you don't actually have to put any schach on the branches themselves. You could put schach on the other 3 walls. And therefore this fourth wall just happens to be a fourth wall, but you're not actually using it. And even if you put, some items on the schach on Yom Tiv, you're only going to be getting benefit from the man-made walls. You're not going to be getting benefit from the tree, and that's why it's allowed when it's the fourth wall. Okay, but there's no implication about, if the stadei ilan would be mutter or not. We're not talking about that. Dekanami, you can also infer it. Dikatani, that we taught, Ze'aklal, this is the rule, called She'ilu Yunatela Ilan, Vichol Lamod, Olden La B'yamtiv Shmamina. Because we taught that any situation where you can remove the tree, and you'll still be able to have a kosher sukkah, you'll still be able to go into the sukkah, that the schach will still be, sturdy, then you can go into it on Yom Tov. And therefore, basically when you have 3 walls, and the fourth wall is this tree, and the schach is resting on the other walls, and this tree really isn't necessary for the sukkah, so then you can go into that sukkah on Yom Tiv. However, if this tree is the third wall of the sukkah, and you're going to be resting schach on it, and you mamish, if you remove the sukkah, if you remove that wall, that tree, you don't have a sukkah anymore. Well, then you can't go into on Yom Tiv, because we're concerned that you might end up benefiting from the branches of the tree itself on Yom Tiv. Okay, that was the Kuf Nun Daled of Masechta Shabbos. So we started off continuing our discussion of Mechamer, right? Of the Rami Bar Chama's statement about what the punishments associated with Mechamer are. Rav Zvid says, well, Rami Bar Chama is saying that if you are Mechamer b'shogeg, then you're going to be potter from a korban chatos, because there's no maisa, there's no action. If you do it b'mezid, well then you are going to get stoned. Rab Yochanan says that you're going to be completely potter for doing mechamer. If you do it b'shogeg, you're not going to be chayav a korban chatos, and because you're not chayav a korban chatos b'shogeg, you're also not going to be chayav skila if you do it b'mezid, and you're not even going to be chayav malkos either because it's a lav shenitan lasaris misas bezdin. But even according to Mandam, who says that a lav shenitan lasaris misas bezdin, you can get malchus. Over here, the pasuk says ata uvemtecha, right? You and your behema. What's the point of you? It means that you have to do the malacha. If your animal does it, you wouldn't be chayiv any punishment. We talked about different ways of unloading an animal on Shabbos. So if the items on the animal are muchan, well then you can just take them off of the animal. If they are muktzeh, well then we say that, says Rav Huna, that you'd be allowed to bring a cushion to prevent them from falling and breaking, as long as it's not going to be mevatel kli me'echanu. If it's mevatel kli me'echanu, so then you would not be able to bring over a cushion. Then we talked about using the side of an animal. Rabbah was sliding his son off the side of the animal, and that was acceptable to him. Abaye seemed to say you can't just use the side of an animal. And then we got into this rather technical proof that Abaye tried to bring from Gemara in Sukkah, from Mishnah in Sukkah, to say that tzidei ilan are not usable, but that was an unsuccessful attempt. Friends, that was Daf Kuf Nun Daled. I hope you enjoyed. Have a great day. Peace.